He thought it was a bear at first, something huge and dark, crumpled in the tall prairie grass just as the sun was bleeding out across the horizon. Cole's hand went to the rifle slung over his shoulder, a reflex born from years of solitude. He'd made peace with the quiet of this ranch, the endless sky, the ghosts. He didn't need any new trouble, but as he got closer, the shape resolved itself. It wasn't a bear. It was a woman. A massive woman. Her shoulders were as broad as his barn door, her arms thick with muscle that strained against the torn fabric of a once white dress. Her skin was caked in dirt and burnt by the sun, and she was shaking, her whole body convulsing with silent, gut-wrenching sobs. She had her arms wrapped around herself, fingers digging into her own flesh, like she was trying to hold the pieces of her soul together by force. He'd seen broken people before. This was different. This was a mountain collapsing from the inside out. Cole stopped a few feet away, saying nothing. He just watched. The silence of the prairie was so complete, he could hear the whisper of the grass and the ragged sound of her breathing. He should have turned around, walked back to his cabin, bolted the door, and forgotten what he saw. His wife Anna had been gone 3 years. He'd promised himself no more entanglements, no more pain. Then she spoke, a whisper that cracked the silence like a whip. "I can't live without a man." Her voice was raw, hoarse, and so full of despair it hit him harder than any gunshot. She wasn't talking to him. She wasn't talking to anyone. It was a confession to the dirt, to the dying sun. It wasn't a plea for help. It was a statement of fact, a final, bitter truth from a woman who looked like she could wrestle the world to its knees and win. And that sound, that broken confession, it changed everything. Cole took a step forward. He could see the streaks her tears had carved through the grime on her cheeks. His own throat felt tight. The loneliness he'd learned to live with, the ache he kept packed down deep, suddenly felt raw again, woken by the sheer force of hers. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. She flinched, startled, looking up at him for the first time. Her eyes were a pale, stormy blue, lost in a face etched with hardship. She swallowed hard, her voice catching in her throat. "Sarah." He held out a hand, not to shake, just an offer, an anchor in the storm. "Come inside. You can rest in the barn tonight. No one's going to hurt you here." She stared at his hand for a long moment, then slowly she took it. Her palm was rough and calloused, and it completely swallowed his. As she rose to her feet, Cole felt the true scale of her. She towered over him, a giantess built of grief and granite. But the weight he felt wasn't just her size. It was the crushing burden of a life lived on the edge of survival. She didn't ask for his name. She didn't have to. That night, Sarah curled up on a bed of fresh hay in the corner of the barn. Cole sat by the main door, his rifle resting across his lap, watching the moon climb into the inky sky. He wasn't guarding against anything outside. He was standing watch over the storm inside her. Every so often she'd whimper in her sleep, her huge frame trembling. She'd mumble names, ghosts from her past. Luke, Daddy, Jeremiah. Cole never asked who they were. Some graves are best left undisturbed. Just before the first hint of dawn, she sat bolt upright. The single lantern hanging from a rafter cast long, dancing shadows across her face. Her eyes were wide, slick with sweat, staring at something only she could see. "I buried them all," she said, her voice flat and hollow. "All 3, with these hands." Cole stayed silent, letting her words hang in the air between them. The barn smelled of hay and dust and old sorrows. "I carried my brother Luke after the fever burned him up from the inside. He was just a boy," she continued, her gaze fixed on the far wall. "My father froze solid driving cattle in a blizzard. I found him leaning against a fence post, looking like a statue of ice. I had to break him free. Her voice began to crack, the stone beginning to crumble. And my husband, Jeremiah. She finally turned her head, her pale eyes finding Cole in the gloom. A terrible, quiet fury shimmered in them. He took one look at me the morning I lost the baby, said I was too big, too loud, too cursed to be a mother, said I was an omen of bad luck. She took a shuddering breath. He rode off that morning. 2 weeks later, they found his body by the river. A saloon brawl, they said. Her massive hands clenched into fists in her lap. I never cried. Not for any of them. I thought being strong meant you had to swallow the pain. Just push it down until you couldn't feel it anymore. But I'm done swallowing, Cole. I'm so full of poison, it's killing me. I want to feel again, even if it kills me. Cole finally stood up, the old wood of the floor groaning under his boots. He walked over and stood before her, looking up into her haunted face. You're not weak for needing someone, he said, his voice low and steady. You're human. She leaned back against the hay, a wave of exhaustion washing over her. You letting me stay. It was the first kind thing a man's done for me in years. He nodded once, then walked to the barn door and looked out at the stars, which were beginning to fade into the gray of morning. You can stay more than a night if you want. Nobody will bother you here. She didn't answer, but as he turned to leave her to her thoughts, he saw her lay her hand over her heart, a simple gesture, as if trying to feel if it was still beating. As he walked back to his cabin in the pre-dawn chill, he felt a crack in the wall he'd built around his own heart. He didn't know if it was letting the light in or just letting the ghosts out. But as the sun crested the horizon, he saw something glinting in the straw where she had been sleeping. He walked back, his curiosity getting the better of him. He reached down and picked it up. It was a small silver locket, tarnished with age. His fingers, clumsy and thick, fumbled with the clasp. It snapped open. Inside was a tiny, faded photograph of a young woman with a bright, hopeful smile. Cole's blood ran cold. He knew that smile. He knew that face. It was Anna's younger sister, Clara. She had run away from home 5 years ago, chasing after some farmhand, and had never been heard from again. And Sarah had her picture. The sun rose, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, but for Cole, the world had just gone dark. He walked back to the cabin, the locket heavy in his palm, feeling like a lead weight pulling him down into a past he thought he'd escaped. Sarah was already on the porch, sitting on the steps, looking small despite her size, her head bowed low. She followed him at sunrise. No words. She just appeared behind him like a shadow and followed him back to the cabin. He didn't tell her to go. He didn't tell her to stay. When they reached the porch, she just sat on the steps, her long legs awkward on the planks. I won't beg, she said to the ground. If you want me gone, just say the word. Cole didn't answer. He went inside, filled a metal cup with cold water from the well, and came back out. He set it down beside her. She flinched at the sound. I didn't ask you to leave, he said, his voice flat. He held out the locket, letting it dangle from its chain. Where did you get this? Her eyes darted to the locket, and for a split second, he saw something flash across her face. Fear. Pure, animal fear. Then it was gone, replaced by a weary mask. Found it, she said, her voice a low murmur. On the trail, weeks ago. She was lying. He could feel it in his bones, the same way he could feel an oncoming storm. He could press her. He could demand the truth. But looking at her, crumpled and broken on his porch, he couldn't bring himself to do it. Not yet. He let the locket fall back into his pocket. Drink, he said. Her lip quivered. She picked up the cup and drank, her throat working hard. When she was done, she asked, still not looking at him, You ever been alone so long it stops hurting? Hurt's different, Cole said, sitting on the railing opposite her. But it still hurts. A soft, bitter laugh escaped her lips. That's what scares me. I think I've stopped feeling anything. I look at the sky, the trees, and it's all just quiet. Like the world died, and I'm the only one left. I noticed, he said simply. The silence that fell between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was just still. Two lonely people sharing the quiet. And then they heard it. A sound on the wind, faint at first, then growing louder, the unmistakable rhythm of horses' hooves. A lot of them, moving fast. Sarah froze solid. Every muscle in her massive body went rigid. "They found me," she whispered, the words barely audible. A raw panic flared in her eyes. Cole was already on his feet, his rifle in his hands, his gaze scanning the horizon. "Who found you?" "My husband's cousins," she breathed, scrambling to her feet. "Elias and his brothers. They said I owed them Jeremiah's land. They chased me halfway across the valley. Said a woman like me didn't deserve to own property. Said I only deserved punishment." Her voice was trembling now, not with grief, but with sheer terror. Cole looked from the rising dust cloud in the distance to the giant, terrified woman beside him. The lie about the locket was still between them, a shard of glass in the air. But the fear in her eyes was real. The threat was real. "You're safe here," he said, his voice hard as iron. "You don't know them," she choked out. "They'd rather burn this place to the ground with us inside it than let me draw a peaceful breath." Cole didn't even blink. He chambered around, the sound echoing in the sudden quiet. "Then I'll stand in the ashes with you." She stared at him, bewildered. This quiet rancher with stormy eyes and calloused hands. This man who had every reason to distrust her, to throw her out. "Why?" she whispered. "Because no one should have to die for needing a home." Something shifted in Sarah then. The terror in her eyes didn't vanish, but it was joined by something else, something hard and fierce, a fire being rekindled in the embers. She stood up to her full, towering height, her fists clenching at her sides. "Then let's see if your roof is strong enough to hold both of us." Just then, the lead rider broke through the tree line. A tall man in a long black coat with a jagged scar that ran from his ear down his throat, pulling at his skin every time he moved his head. He pulled his horse to a halt just outside the fence line, his men fanning out behind him. His cold eyes swept over the property, lingering on the barn, the cabin, before finally settling on Sarah. A cruel, knowing smirk twisted his lips. Well, well, look what the wind blew in. His gaze shifted to Cole, the smirk vanishing. "You should have stayed out of Haskell family business, rancher." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Just like last time. Sarah whipped her head around to look at Cole, her face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. What did he mean? Last time. The wind kicked up, carrying the dry scent of dust and violence. The man with the scar, Elias, watched them, enjoying the sudden, terrible tension he had just created. He knew something that connected this quiet rancher to the very people who were hunting this broken woman. Cole's face was grim, his knuckles white on the stock of his rifle. He didn't look at Sarah. He kept his eyes locked on Elias. "She's under my roof now, Elias. That makes her my business." Elias laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Your roof burned once before, didn't it, Cole? All for protecting someone who didn't belong to you. Seems you haven't learned your lesson." The blood drained from Sarah's face. She looked from Elias's sneering face to Cole's stony silence. 1,000 terrifying questions bloomed in her mind. What was he talking about? What happened last time? "This ain't your fight, rancher," Elias spat. "She's a thief and a liar. That land is ours by blood." "She hasn't lied once since she got here," Cole said, the words a low growl. But even as he said them, the weight of the locket in his pocket felt heavier. It was a lie. He knew she'd lied. But he'd said the words anyway. He had drawn his line in the dirt. Elias's eyes narrowed. You'll die for her then. A freak who brings death wherever she goes. Before Cole could answer, Sarah stepped forward, placing herself beside him. She was trembling, but her voice was clear and loud, ringing out across the yard. I've been dead a long time, she said, her eyes fixed on Elias. But this man made me feel alive again. So if I die today, I die standing next to the first person who didn't try to make me smaller. A tense silence fell over the yard. The riders shifted uneasily in their saddles. Elias stared at the two of them, the quiet rancher and the giant widow, standing shoulder to shoulder against the world. His face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "We'll be back," he snarled, "and next time, we won't bother with talking." He wrenched his horse around and spurred it into a gallop, his men thundering after him, leaving a cloud of dust and unanswered questions hanging in the air. As the sound of the hooves faded, Sarah turned to Cole, her eyes wide with a terrible new fear. It wasn't about the fight to come. It was about the fight that had already happened. "Cole," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Who was he talking about? What happened last time?" Cole finally lowered his rifle. He looked tired, older than he had just a few minutes ago. He finally met her gaze, and she saw a deep old pain in his eyes that mirrored her own. "He was talking about my wife," he said, his voice thick with grief and rage. "Anna. The men who ran her down in that wagon. The men the sheriff called unidentified. It was Elias. And your husband, Jeremiah." The world tilted under Sarah's feet. The name, Jeremiah. The man she had mourned. The man whose cousins now hunted her. He hadn't just abandoned her, he was a killer. The confession she had made in the barn, the story of her broken life, was suddenly intertwined with the story of his. The silence between them was no longer just quiet. It was the calm in the center of a hurricane, and the walls were closing in fast. Sarah stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. The air left her lungs in a rush. "No!" she gasped. "No, that's not possible." But it was. She could see the terrible, unshakable truth in Cole's eyes. Jeremiah, her husband. The man she'd thought was just a coward had been a monster. The saloon brawl wasn't just a random act of violence. It was the universe delivering a justice she never knew was owed, and Cole, this quiet, gentle man who had offered her shelter. He had been living with the other half of that story all this time. The locket in his pocket wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was a ghost, connecting her past to his in the most horrific way imaginable. Clara, Anna's sister. Had Jeremiah been involved with her too? Was that who he ran off to find? "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Cole, I swear to you, I didn't know." He looked at her, his face an unreadable mask of grief and fury. For a moment she thought he was going to turn on her, that the shared enemy wouldn't be enough to bridge this chasm of secrets. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was his vengeance. "I believe you," he said finally, the words sounding like they were dragged up from somewhere deep and broken. "But it doesn't matter. They're coming back, and this time they'll be coming to bury us both." That single sentence galvanized them. The shock and betrayal hardened into a cold, shared resolve. This was no longer about a piece of land or a lonely widow. It was a reckoning. They didn't speak of it again. There was no time for apologies or explanations. There was only work to be done. By sundown, the ranch was transformed into a fortress. Cole, moving with a grim efficiency, showed her the weak points, the lines of sight, and Sarah, fueled by a righteous fury she had never known, became a force of nature. She hauled fence rails like they were toothpicks, stacking them against the cabin walls. She dug a shallow trench along the front porch with her bare hands, the dirt flying behind her. She wrapped barbed wire around the posts until her fingers were raw and bleeding, her movements powerful and precise. For the first time in her life, her size wasn't a curse. It was a weapon. Her strength wasn't something to hide. It was their only hope. As the last light of day faded, casting the world in shades of blood and bruised purple, they collapsed onto the porch steps, sweat-soaked and exhausted. The air was thick with the smell of turned earth and impending doom. Cole lit a cigarette and, without a word, passed it to her. She took it, her hand trembling slightly. "I ain't smoked since my wedding night," she said, her voice raspy. She took a long drag, the ember glowing brightly in the dusk. "Was it a good night?" Cole asked quietly. She looked out at the darkening prairie, her expression unreadable. "It ended with me crying alone in a barn." They sat in silence for a while after that, the only sound the chirping of crickets and the whisper of the wind. Then, Cole reached into his shirt pocket. He didn't pull out the locket. He pulled out a small, twisted piece of metal, a broken silver ring. "This was Anna's," he said, his voice rough. "The inside is engraved with her name. She's buried out by the orchard. She used to tell me I was too stubborn to cry." He looked at Sarah, his eyes catching the last of the light. "I haven't, since the day I buried her." Sarah looked from the broken ring to his face. "Did you love her?" "I still do," he said, without hesitation. That simple, honest statement made Sarah's throat tighten. "I've never been loved," she confessed, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Not really. Not without someone wanting something from me in return." Cole's gaze was steady. "I don't want anything from you, Sarah, except the truth." The lie about the locket was still there, a silent accusation between them. Her throat closed up. "I'm scared," she whispered, the admission costing her more than anything she'd ever said. "I've never said that out loud before. I'm scared that even if we survive this, I'll still be empty inside." "You're not empty," Cole said, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "You're just waiting for something that hasn't been stolen from you yet." She blinked back tears. "I thought it had all been stolen already." "Not all of it," he said. "Not tonight." He stood up and walked to the cabin door, then paused, his hand on the frame. "If we make it through this, I'd like you to stay, not just in the barn, not just for the work." She froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You're asking me to stay?" "I'm telling you," he said, turning to look at her. "This place, it's been dead for 3 years. You're the first thing that's made it feel alive again." A single tear escaped and traced a clean path through the dirt on her cheek. It wasn't a tear of grief. It was hope, frightening, fragile, and more powerful than any fear. The wind howled through the trees that night, a mournful, restless sound. Neither of them slept. Cole sat in a chair by the window, his rifle across his lap, a silent sentinel. Sarah paced the small cabin like a caged animal, the floorboards groaning under her weight. The ghosts of Anna and Jeremiah and Luke and her father were all there in the room with them, their unspoken stories fueling the tension. Just as the sky began to bleed from black to gray, a new sound cut through the wind. A single horse approaching fast. Not the thunder of a posse. Something else. Cole was at the door in an instant, rifle raised. Sarah stood behind him, her hands clenched into fists. A lone rider galloped into the yard and slid his horse to a stop. He was young, barely a man, his face pale with terror in the pre-dawn light. Sarah gasped. Silas. It was one of Elias's younger brothers, the cousin who always looked away, who never joined in the cruel laughter. "You gotta run," Silas panted, his eyes wide with fear. "Both of you. Elias. He ain't just coming back with riders." Cole kept the rifle leveled. "Talk." "It ain't just about the land," Silas stammered, glancing nervously back the way he came. "Jeremiah, before he died, he told Elias, he found gold on your property, Sarah. A small vein, but enough to make a man crazy. That's what this has always been about. They hounded you off so they could have it all. The revelation hit them like a physical blow. Greed. It was always about greed. That's not all, Silas said, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. Elias bought dynamite in town yesterday. He's not coming to fight you. He's coming to erase you. He's gonna level this whole place, bury you both, and dig up that gold from the ashes. He pointed a shaking finger toward the east side of the barn. He plans to plant the first charge there, by the foundation, to bring the whole structure down on top of the cabin. It was a suicide mission. But now it was a suicide mission with a chance. A single, slim chance. Why are you telling us this? Cole asked, his voice low and suspicious. Because I watched him kill your wife, Cole, Silas choked out, tears streaming down his face. I was in that wagon. A boy. Jeremiah was driving, drunk as a skunk. Elias just laughed. I ain't slept a full night since. I can't have another death on my soul. Just as he finished speaking, a single, sharp crack echoed from the tree line. Silas jerked in the saddle. A dark stain blossomed on the front of his shirt. He looked down, a look of shocked surprise on his face, before slumping forward and tumbling into the dust. The trap had been sprung. Elias had been watching the whole time, and the battle for the ranch had just begun. Chaos erupted. Muzzle flashes lit up the pre-dawn gloom from the trees surrounding the property. The air filled with the whistle of lead and the splintering of wood as bullets tore into the cabin walls. Cole shoved Sarah back inside and slammed the door, dropping the heavy bar into place, just as a volley of shots hammered against it. He played us! Cole yelled over the deafening roar of gunfire. He sent his own brother in to die just to draw us out. The pure, calculated evil of it was staggering. Elias hadn't just been watching. He'd used Silas as bait. He'd sacrificed his own blood to get the drop on them. Sarah didn't answer. She was already moving, her grief and shock replaced by a cold, lethal rage. She grabbed the iron fence post she'd sharpened earlier, its barbed wire wrapping glinting in the dim light from the windows. Her face was a mask of stone. The boy, Silas, was dead because he'd tried to do the right thing, because he'd tried to atone for her husband's sins. The dynamite, she growled, her voice a low rumble. He's still going for the barn. They've got us pinned down, Cole shouted, firing a shot through a crack in the window frame. A scream from outside told him he'd found his mark. The yard was a kill zone. Riders circled the cabin like vultures, firing from all directions. There was no way to get to the barn. They were trapped. Then came a new sound. A high-pitched, triumphant laugh from outside. It was Elias. It's over, rancher. You should have stayed out of it, he shrieked. But before you die, maybe you should ask your giantess the truth. Ask her how her precious Jeremiah really died. The words cut through the gunfire. Cole risked a glance at Sarah. Her back was to him, her massive shoulders rigid. What did he mean? Another secret? Another lie? The doubt was a poisoned dart, and in the heat of battle, it found its mark. Sarah? He said, his voice tight. She didn't turn around. Not now, Cole. The sun was beginning to rise, casting long, bloody shadows across the yard. The gunfire intensified. A bullet smashed through the window, showering the room with glass. They couldn't stay here. They were sitting ducks. Suddenly, a lull in the shooting, a heavy, ominous silence. He's making his move, Cole whispered, his eyes wide. The dynamite. Sarah moved then, not toward the door. She moved to the back wall of the cabin, the one facing away from the barn. With a deafening roar of pure fury, she rammed her shoulder against the log wall. The wood groaned, splintered. She roared again and slammed into it a second time. Wood cracked, dust rained down. On the third hit, the logs gave way and a section of the wall exploded outward. They had a new exit. "Cover me," she grunted, and before Cole could argue, she squeezed through the opening and was gone, charging into the chaos, the iron post held like a spear. Cole watched from the new opening, firing methodically, taking down riders who were distracted by the sudden, impossible appearance of the giant woman who had just smashed her way through a solid wall. Sarah was a storm. She moved with a speed that defied her size, a whirlwind of vengeful power. She ignored the bullets zinging past her head. She had one target, the east side of the barn. She saw him there, Elias, kneeling by the foundation, a bundle of dynamite sticks in his hand, fumbling with a fuse. He looked up, his face a mask of shock and rage as he saw her bearing down on him. He dropped the dynamite and drew his pistol, firing wildly. Sarah didn't even slow down. She felt a searing pain in her shoulder, but barely registered it. She was 3 feet away when he squeezed the trigger again, but the shot never came. Another figure stepped out from the deep shadows of the barn, right behind Elias. The figure moved with a lazy, arrogant confidence, and brought a pistol butt down hard on the back of Elias's head. Elias crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Sarah skidded to a halt, her heart stopping in her chest. The figure turned. The morning sun caught his face. He was smiling, a cruel, familiar smirk. His hair was slicked back, his clothes clean. He looked rested, healthy, alive. It was Jeremiah, her husband, the man she had buried, the man she had grieved, the man who had killed Cole's wife. "Surprise," Jeremiah said, his voice dripping with venom. "You really thought I'd die over some saloon girl? Please. I just needed to get away from you, you cursed, oversized sow." The world fractured. Every feeling she'd ever had for him, every tear she'd shed, every ounce of grief, curdled into something toxic and black. The story of her life wasn't a tragedy. It was a joke, a long, cruel, elaborate lie. Jeremiah saw the look on her face, and his smirk widened. He picked up the dynamite, holding it casually in one hand, his pistol aimed steadily at her heart with the other. Elias was always a fool. "Too much noise, not enough thinking," Jeremiah said, gesturing with the pistol. "He wanted to blow the place up. I just want what's mine, the gold, the land, and a little bit of payback." Cole appeared at the corner of the cabin, his rifle trained on Jeremiah. "Drop it," he ordered, his voice shaking with a rage so profound it was almost silent. Jeremiah laughed. "The stoic rancher. You know, I did you a favor getting rid of your wife. She was a bore." He then looked back at Sarah, his eyes glittering with malice. "He still doesn't know the whole story, does he, my love? Elias was yelling about it. Tell him. Tell him why I really left. Tell him what happened to our son." This was it, the final secret, the one she had never even confessed to herself. I lost the baby," she stammered, the words feeling like shards of glass in her throat. "Liar!" Jeremiah screamed, his face contorting into a mask of ugliness. "You didn't lose him. I took him from you." He turned his crazed eyes to Cole. "She wouldn't stop crying night after night, this giant beast, weeping over nothing. I told her to shut up. She wouldn't. So I hit her. Just once. In the gut. And the crying." It finally stopped. The confession hung in the air, more devastating than any explosion. It wasn't just that he'd left her. It wasn't just that he'd faked his death. He had murdered their child, and he had let her carry that guilt, that shame, that cursed feeling for years. Something inside Sarah snapped. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling, a deep, seismic shift. The grief didn't just break. It shattered into a million pieces, and what was left behind wasn't sorrow. It was a pure, cold, liberating fury. The last chain that bound her to the woman she used to be was gone. She let out a roar. It wasn't a sound of pain or fear. It was the sound of a mountain being born. She charged. Jeremiah fired. The bullet tore through the flesh of her arm, but she didn't stop. She slammed into him like a locomotive. The pistol flew from his hand. The dynamite tumbled into the dirt. He was a small, fragile thing in her grasp. She didn't use the iron post, she used her hands. The same hands that had buried her family, the same hands that had rebuilt this ranch. Cole, seeing his moment, dealt with the stunned and groggy Elias, a swift, brutal conclusion to a 3-year-old debt. The remaining cousins, seeing both their leaders fall, turned and fled, vanishing over the horizon like the cowards they were. Sarah lifted Jeremiah off the ground by the front of his shirt, his feet dangling uselessly in the air. He clawed at her hands, his face purple with terror and lack of oxygen. For one long, terrible moment, the sun rising behind her, she held the life of her monster in her hands. She could end it. She could crush him and everything he had ever done to her. She looked into his terrified, bulging eyes, and she saw nothing. Not a man, not a husband, just a pathetic, empty space. With a grunt of disgust, she threw him to the ground. He landed in a heap, gasping and sobbing in the dirt. "You're not worth burying," she said, her voice calm and clear. She turned her back on him and walked away, leaving him broken and alone in the wreckage of his own greed. Her strength wasn't a burden anymore. It was her salvation. It was her justice. The sun was fully up now, its light washing over the ruined yard. Smoke curled from the cabin. The ground was littered with spent shells and shattered wood. It was a scene of utter devastation. But for the first time in her life, Sarah felt completely whole. Cole walked over to her, his face bruised, his shirt torn. He stopped in front of her, saying nothing. He just looked at her, at this incredible woman, bloodied and bruised, standing tall in the morning sun. He reached out and took her massive, trembling hand in his. She didn't pull away. "You said you can't live without a man," he whispered. She turned her head, her pale blue eyes, no longer haunted, met his, and for the first time, she smiled, a real true smile that reached her eyes. "I lied," she said. He tilted his head. "You did?" She nodded slowly, her smile widening. "I can live. I don't want to anymore. Not without you." The quiet that followed wasn't heavy or sad. It was sacred, a new beginning rising from the ashes of the old. He stood and pulled her up. Her body was unsteady, exhausted. He caught her, holding her steady. They walked back toward what was left of the cabin, side by side, leaving the past whimpering in the dust behind them. When they reached the porch, she looked at the bullet-riddled building that had become more than a shelter. It was home. "I don't want to leave," she said. He shook his head, his arm tightening around her. "You're not going anywhere." The prairie was quiet the next morning. It wasn't the silence of dread or loneliness. It was the deep, peaceful silence that comes after a storm has raged and failed to destroy the things that truly matter. The yard was a mess of broken wood and torn earth, but the smoke rising from the chimney was steady, and the morning sun was warm. Sarah stood barefoot in the middle of the wreckage, a patched-up bandage on her arm. The sun painted her bruised skin in gold, and she looked less like a survivor and more like a queen surveying her kingdom. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shaking. She was just still. Cole came out of the cabin with a basin of clean water and a cloth. He set it down on the porch rail. "You're bleeding through," he said softly. "I've bled worse," she answered, turning to him. Her eyes were clear. The ghosts were gone. "I've never stood still like this before. My whole life, I was either running from something or running toward the next heartbreak." Cole gently took her arm and began to clean the wound. His touch was rough but careful. "You're not running anymore," he said, not looking up. "And you're not pushing me away," she replied. He looked up at her then, the sun casting deep lines on his weathered face. "No," he said, "I'm not." She took a shaky breath, her hand resting on a splintered porch post. "I used to believe I was built for breaking things, plowing fields, digging graves, breaking hearts. I was built to be the strong one, so no one would ever have to carry me. Cole finished tying off the bandage and rose to his full height, standing before her, face to face. "Then let me carry you now," he said. And that broke her. A single tear fell, then another, not of sadness, but of release. For all the years she had held everything in, for all the pain she had swallowed, she was finally letting it go. He reached out and took her hand. She didn't hesitate this time. "I don't know how to be small," she whispered. "You don't have to be," he replied, his voice firm. "I'm not afraid of your size, Sarah. I'm in awe of it. I was afraid of a world that was too small to see it." She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, pulling him into an embrace so powerful and gentle it took his breath away. She held him not out of weakness or need, but out of choice. She had finally found something worth holding on to. Cole buried his face in her shoulder. She smelled of wood smoke, dirt, and iron, and he had never breathed in anything more like home. Later that day, they began to rebuild. Together. Sarah cleared the wreckage, her strength a tool of creation now, not destruction. Cole began patching the walls, his hammer strikes echoing a rhythm of renewal. They moved in a silent, easy sync, two people who had found their place not just on a piece of land, but with each other. That afternoon, a soft rain began to fall. Not a storm, but a gentle, cleansing shower. Sarah walked out into the middle of the yard and tilted her face to the sky, closing her eyes and letting the rain wash away the blood, the sweat, and the last remnants of her past. Cole watched her from the porch for a moment, then he walked down the steps and joined her in the rain. It soaked his shirt in seconds, but he didn't care. She opened her eyes and looked at him. "I thought I needed a man to survive," she said, her voice soft over the sound of the rain. "But now I know. I just needed someone who saw all of me, and stayed." "I stayed," Cole said simply. She leaned in and pressed her forehead against his. "And I'm staying too." That night, they built a small fire in the yard from the broken timbers. They sat close, his arm draped across her broad back, and watched the stars come out, bright and clear in the rain-washed sky. The world around them was wide and quiet and free, and for the first time in her life, Sarah felt small. Not in the way the world had tried to make her, but in the way only love can, making you feel so safe and so held that the size of your body doesn't matter. In that quiet space between the firelight and the stars, a home was truly born. Not of wood and nails, but of scars and trust, and the sheer, stubborn refusal of two people to walk away. And when Sarah whispered, "I think I'm ready to love without being afraid," Cole didn't say a word. He just pulled her closer. Because sometimes the only answer you ever need is for someone to stay. Thank you for staying with us through this powerful journey. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that even the strongest hearts can long to be seen, and even the loneliest places can become home, then don't leave just yet. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a tale of survival and redemption like this again. We've got more stories from the wild frontier, filled with heartbreak, courage, and the unbreakable human spirit. And I want you right there with me for every single one. Your next favorite story is already waiting. I'll see you in the next one.